Hello and welcome to our class about the Yutes Kislev, the Rosh Hashanah of Hasidus. The 19th of Kislev is the anniversary of the Alter Rebbe's release from Tsarist prison, and it was subsequently considered to be the Rosh Hashanah of Hasidus, where a whole new intensity and approach to teaching Chassidus began. And every year when we reach this milestone, this date, this anniversary, we renew our commitment to learning Chassidus and teaching Chassidus. So let's explore a little bit, what is it that Chassidus expects us to do? What do we expect Chassidus to do for us? And what can the two of us do for the world around us? So I want to share today a sicha, a talk that the Rebbe gave, in which he expounds and explains a talk given by his predecessor, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchok Schneerson, who once explained what the study of Chassidus means in the following way. He said that pearls are found on the seabed, and coals are found deep beneath the earth's surface. And in order to try to retrieve them, either one of them, it takes a lot of work. And it takes a lot of trust, because those who actually go down into the mines or need to trust their leaders in order to know where to go and how to go and be precise, because if not, the whole enterprise can be at risk. There is, however, one thing that they cannot rely on their leader for, and that is breathing. They must breathe on their own. They must make sure that they have a reliable and constant connection to oxygen while they find themselves digging for coal beneath the earth's surface, in order to make sure that they don't fall apart. That is their responsibility. They can rely on their leader to tell them to know where to go, turn right, turn left, the subterranean maps that the leaders have, but they must breathe on their own. So, what does this mean? So the Rebbe took this explanation that his predecessor gave and asked a few questions. He says, first of all, why do you need two examples? Why do you need an example of coal and an example of pearls? What do these two examples add to each other? Why wouldn't it be enough just to give one example? The second question he asks, why does he explain? He mentions pearls. The previous Rebbe mentions pearls in the beginning of his talk, but then goes on to explain at great length the example that he gave of coals. So why did he even mention the pearls, and why does he explain the coal situation rather than the pearls? And the third question that the Rebbe asks is, any example brought in Torah or by true Torah teachers is precise. So what is the connection between coals and the earth, and the pearls and the ocean? And it cannot just be because they happen to be found there. It's not just because coals happen to be found underground and the pearls happen to be found on the seabed. The reason that happens is because there is some intrinsic connection between the two. So therefore, the Rebbe looks for that connection in order to understand what is the connection between coals and the earth, and the connection between pearls and the ocean bed. The difference between earth and ocean is the following. All earthly creatures living on the earth, were produced by the earth. That is what the Torah tells us, that the earth produced all the animals and anything living on it, on the earth. But once they were created, they don't continue living in the earth. They live on the earth. And even though they depend on the earth because they have to eat and they eat the plants that grow from the earth, but they see themselves and feel themselves, perceive themselves to be separate entities. In contradistinction to the creatures that were created from the ocean. All sea animals, all sea creatures were created, produced by the ocean, as the Torah tells us that God commanded the oceans to produce the sea creatures. And once they were created, they continue living in the water. A sea creature cannot leave the water and continue to live. Whereas land animals don't live in the land, they live on the land. So what does this have to do with anything? These two types of life forms represent two types of perception that one can have. One can either perceive himself to be an independent creature that God had created years ago, but one does not depend on him, really. Depends on God's favors, to make sure that God sends him food and sustenance and whatever he needs and protects him. But basically, he's a self-sustaining creature who works and earns money and buys his food and pays his rent, and as long as God doesn't bother him, he's okay. That's one perception. The other perception is that you see God's presence so clearly that you have it very clear that you do not exist as an independent entity. There is nothing in the world that exists independently of God. As a matter of fact, that is the definition of God, as we find it in the beginning of the Rambam, in the Yad HaChazaka, that God, the most simple and concise definition of what God is an independent being upon which everything else depends. God depends on nothing, and everything else depends on God. Not just to live, but to exist. Anything that exists is because God is creating it in that instance of his existence. If it wouldn't be for that life force that creates it at that instant, it would cease to exist. God doesn't have to do something to destroy the world. He just stops creating it, and automatically it just doesn't exist anymore. So we might understand it philosophically, theoretically, but there are those that can perceive it actually, that see it that way. So there are two types of people. There are the land creatures. There are those who are like the land creatures, who perceive themselves as independent beings that depend on God's favors and grace to continue existing, but they are an independent existence. Then there are those who have the perception of the marine creatures, and they are actually, the Zohar compares them to fish. The tzaddikim are compared to fish for this reason, that they are constantly aware of the fact that their existence depends on God's life-creating force, and if not for that, they would not exist, that they are not any real existence, that God is the only real existence. So these are the two types of perception that one can have. As a matter of fact, these are the two types of perception that one does have. Every one of us. We have our conscious perception, where we are independent beings that owe God our existence because of the favors he does for us, but we are independent beings. That is our conscious perception. Then there is the subconscious perception that our soul has, where it perceives things the way they really are, and that is that God is the only true existence, and we are just circumstantial and temporary creations that exist because God decides that we should exist at this very given moment. So that is the difference between the coals and the pearls. So the coals have to do with our earthly dimension, and the pearls have to do with our marine dimension. I will soon see how that works. There is a very basic question that many ask, and maybe you've asked yourself, and that is, why is Chassidus so important? If Chassidus was so important, then where was it until now? In other words, the Jewish people received the Torah 3,330 years ago at Mount Sinai, and Chassidus was revealed about 250 years ago by the Baal Shemtov. So where was it all throughout our history? And if it wasn't necessary, then why all of a sudden did it become necessary now? In other words, what is its purpose that makes it relevant now rather than hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago? So there are two answers that are generally given. One answer is that since the world became spiritually darker and more dense and coarse, in order to survive in such a climate, we needed reinforcements. We needed a stronger light. We needed a stronger energy to be able to withstand the toxic impact of the world we live in. For example, one might say, in the summer I can walk around with a short sleeve shirt and I'm very comfortable. When it comes winter time, obviously, I cannot survive with the same garments I use in the summer because the situation around me became much more difficult. I need different resources to be able to survive in those conditions. So being the world has regressed spiritually, and the world has become much darker spiritually speaking, so Chassidus came to help us overcome the dangers lurking in such a situation. That is one answer given. Another answer given, which is very different to the first answer, is that since we are approaching the end of our exile period of history, and that means that we are coming closer to the messianic age and stage of creation, and the main characteristic of the messianic age and stage of existence is the clarity of perception regarding God's existence. So therefore, in contradistinction to how we perceive things before that age and stage comes, where we do not perceive that at all. So in order to prepare ourselves for that experience, we need to do some training, right? You can't just decide to run a marathon because it's a nice thing to do. If you decide to run a marathon and you're interested in running a marathon, you have to do a lot of training beforehand in order to be able to actually run the marathon. So the idea here is that in order to prepare ourselves for Mashiach, we need to get into the spirit of things. We need to prepare ourselves adequately. And one way to prepare ourselves is by studying Chassidus, which is a taste, is a sample of what Mashiach will actually be teaching us and showing us and helping us achieve. So here we have two different answers. One answer is that Chassidus is here to help us deal with the darkness, and the other answer is that Chassidus is here to help prepare us for the coming of Mashiach. That wasn't mean in practical terms. In practical terms, it is telling us that Chassidus has two functions. One that relates to our conscious awareness, the way we understand things, the way we understand and perceive the world around us. Chassidus comes to help us in that struggle, which is a very practical thing. We look at the world around us and we understand things a certain way, and because we understand things a certain way, we feel a certain way, and because we feel that certain way, we behave a certain way. There's a whole chain reaction, but it all starts from the way we perceive the world around us. Now, if we were to be able to perceive things more deeply, we wouldn't react in the way we react in a more superficial way. It's very practical. When somebody walks by, for example, somebody walks into the room and doesn't say hello to you, you get all insulted. How come this guy ignored me? And you're all upset, and you're hurt, and you can get very hurt, and depending who the person is, and depending, and many different things. You can get very depressed and you can go way out of whack. But let's say this guy broke his glasses and he really is very, very nearsighted and can't see past his nose without his glasses. He didn't see you. It's not that he was ignoring you, he just simply didn't see you, right? So if you become aware of that fact, automatically your feelings change. Then you're not insulted anymore. And then you have no hard feelings towards a person. Your whole reality depends on how you perceive something. So sometimes it's a matter of information that you might be lacking that can make the difference. And sometimes it's understanding that information, having that information in context, understanding the value of what you understand and how to deal with it, right? So sometimes when you see a situation, it can really deflate you, and sometimes it energizes you, and sometimes it inspires you. It all depends how you see it. So that is where Chassidus comes into the picture to help us deal with the dark world around us. When we see the world around us in the dark way that we do see it, we tend to see it, which is natural for us to see it. So Chassidus comes and helps us with that. Now, that is the kol aspect. We'll get to the pearl aspect in a minute. Now, the kols have two things that they do for us. One thing that they do for us is they create warmth. Another thing they do for us is create light. Now, warmth and light are two things that are not something which is added to anything. It is just something which is inherent in something. In other words, when the difference between something that is cold and something that is warm, it's the very same thing can be cold and the very same thing can be warm. Now, when something is warm, it's a sign of life, and when it's cold, it's a sign of the opposite of life. Okay, so when we talk about enthusiasm, right? A person who's enthusiastic or not enthusiastic, or a person who's in the mood or not in the mood, it's the very same person. The very same person, if he's enthusiastic about something, will do things in a certain way. If he's not enthusiastic about something, he will do it in a very different way, or won't do it at all. So basically what Chassidus comes to give us, like the kols, is warmth, is vitality, is for us to appreciate the life in Torah and mitzvahs. So when a person is told he has to do this, he has to do that, God wants him to do this, God wants him to do that, and he doesn't appreciate its intrinsic value, he'll do it by force, maybe he won't do it altogether because he's just not interested, or he'll do it because he feels he has no choice. But if he's actually convinced that it's something that is important to do, he will be motivated to do so, and he'll do it to the utmost of his ability rather than to the minimum of his ability. As the Talmud tells us, the difference between giving a gift or selling something, right? Let's say you tell somebody, I want to sell a field that I have. I have a field, I want to sell it to you. Okay, so for this and this price. The guy gives him the money, and then he goes to his field, and he says, no, I didn't mean this field, I meant the other field I have. He says, what? I wanted the better quality field, not the worse grade field. So and the seller says, no, my intention was to sell the worst field I have, not the best one that I have. So the conclusion is that a person sells the worst that he has, not the best that he has. The person wants to get rid of the worst property that he has, not the best. So therefore, since a person usually sells something because he's forced to sell, for whatever circumstance, he's forced to, he doesn't really sell because he wants to, he sells because he needs to sell the property. So he tries to get away with as little as possible. In contradistinction to a gift, if somebody says, someone promised to give someone a gift, a field, and let's say this person passes away, and then later the recipient of the gift comes to claim the gift and says, I'm coming here to claim the field that this person promised to give me. And so they say, okay, here's the field, it's the lowest quality field. He says, no, I'm sure he wanted to give me the better quality field. So there we say that a person gives a gift, he gives the best that he can, because he gives a gift because he wants to, not because he has to. And when someone sells, he does it because he has to, so he gets away with the minimum. A person who does something because he wants to tries to give the maximum. So the same is when we talk about serving God. If a person has motivation, he'll do the utmost that he can because he's motivated by it and feels for it. In contradistinction with somebody who is not motivated and feels he has no choice, will do as little as possible. So that is what Chassidus does. It gives you warmth. The teachings of Chassidus help a person be enthusiastic about his serving God, about studying Torah and learning and doing mitzvahs. But then there is the light aspect, which is very interesting. What's the light aspect in contrast to the warmth aspect? Right? Fire produces both warmth and light. That's what coals are used for, right? To produce fire, which produces warmth and light. So Chassidus gives us warmth and light. So the warmth is the enthusiasm that you have. Now, here's something interesting. Why do you have enthusiasm for something? It's because you like it, right? It appeals to you. It appeals to your understanding, it appeals to your feelings, you identify with it. It is something which is therefore limited by your own considerations. Light is something that shows you what is happening around you, exposes you to something beyond yourself, and therefore can lead you to go beyond your own natural preference and comfort zone. Okay, if you're doing something because you want to be motivated, so you won't leave your comfort zone because you're looking to be motivated, you're looking to feel good. Now, if what you're looking for is to do what's right, and doing what's right is not always synonymous with feeling good, so then you are able to go beyond your feel-good comfort zone, represented by the warmth that Chassidus gives us, which is very important to have that, but you're not limited by it. You're able to go beyond that. You're able to do what you see is necessary, even though it's not something which necessarily you personally feel for. Okay, so these are the two contributions that Chassidus gives to our conscious dealing with the world around us. It helps us tap into the motivation and inspiration to do things to the utmost of our enthusiasm, but then it also gives us the ability to go even further than that and do something that is valuable beyond our own personal satisfaction, and which generates enthusiasm and the warmth. So these are the two things that the coals do for us. The coals that are in the earth, they help our earthly dimension, meaning our conscious interaction with the world, where the darkness of the world has an impact on us, and we need that light in order to survive that on the two levels that we said, creating that enthusiasm that motivates us to actually do things, and then the light which pushes us to go beyond our own comfort zone and do what is right beyond that which just feels good and is our own self-expression. Then we have but then the Rebbe says that it's not enough. In order to get to that, how do we access the warmth and the light of Chassidus? So for that, we need to follow the instructions to the T that the leader of the expedition gives us. In other words, in order for us to be able to access the teachings of Chassidus, to access the coals, to access the light and warmth of Chassidus, it takes a lot of effort, going deep beneath the surface and working hard to get there. You have to follow the instructions. You have to follow the instructions of the Rebbe in each generation who teaches us how to access that part of the Torah that will provide us with the warmth and the light. But there's one thing that depends on us, in addition to following the instructions, and that is breathing. We need to breathe on our own. And what does breathing on your own mean? It means to have access to oxygen. And the idea of having access to oxygen, the Rebbe explains, is that we need to work. We need to study Chassidus every day. That the study of Chassidus is the oxygen that allows us to live spiritually. And just like breathing, which must be done every single day, you cannot say, I will live Sunday, I will live Tuesday, and Monday I'll take a break. You cannot do that, because if you take a break on Monday, there will be no Tuesday. So, too, the Rebbe says regarding studying Chassidus, learning Chassidus, you have to study every single day, and it doesn't matter how much you know already. It's just breathing. If you breathed yesterday, that does not absolve you from breathing now. You must breathe constantly in order to continue living. So, learning Chassidus is like breathing, is accessing that pure oxygen that allows you to live and allows you to function. And you must study it not as something that you've done in the past. It must be a constant new breath. You can't, the Rebbe doesn't use this example, it says when it occurs to me now as I'm saying it, you can't re-breathe the air that you breathe already. Once you breathe air and you exhale, you need to inhale new air. And the same is regarding the vital force that you acquire through learning Chassidus. Every day you must learn something new. You must learn it with new effort. Yes, you can learn the same thing 100 times, but not just repeating it, but to learn it again with renewed concentration, learning something new every time you actually do it. And that is what generates the oxygen, the spiritual oxygen necessary for you to be able to survive while you dig and look for the coal, which can be found very deep underground. And it's very motivating to read it in the source. Actually, it's in the Sichos, volume 20. The Sicha starts on page 171, and this whole piece about the necessity to actually study yourself is on page 175. So it's a very juicy piece that is worthwhile savoring in the original text. So this is what the Rebbe says is the coal aspect of Chassidus, the warmth and the light. But then there's the pearl aspect. What is the pearl aspect? The pearl aspect is something which is just a matter of beauty. You can live your whole life without pearls. It's very difficult to live without coals. You need heat, you need light. You can't really survive without heat and light. But you can survive without pearls. So one might say, okay, so what's the pearl aspect? The pearl aspect is just a matter of beauty. It's an added luxury that I really don't need. Why should I bother working for something that is a total luxury, which I really, really do not need? So the Rebbe explains that this is another stage in learning Chassidus. In other words, the coal aspect represents the warmth and light that is necessary in your conscious interrelation with the world for you to be able to understand the world in a way that motivates you to serve Hashem. And but it's all the way you understand and feel it. And even if you see what needs to be done beyond your feeling and your understanding, it's also what you see and understand should be done beyond your feeling and understanding. But then there's an aspect that is even higher than that, and that is when you submit yourself, you submerge yourself into something and become totally nullified in that existence, which is the idea of water. When you submerge yourself in the water, you're totally covered by the water. That's the whole idea of going to the mikveh, where the water covers you totally. You're totally submerged, and that is what purifies you. You're totally dedicated and subjugated to God's will. That is a second stage. That is something that comes from your subconscious self. In other words, like we said before, your conscious self perceives you to be a separate entity, an independent entity that is meant to serve God, but you are a separate entity serving God. The essence of your soul, your subconscious self, or your essential self, perceives things for what they are essentially, and that is that we are all just a totally and constant dependent existence that depends constantly on God's creating us for our own very existence. And that is the idea of the pearls. The idea of the pearls is something that comes from the water, and something that goes beyond understanding and feeling. It's just a commitment that goes beyond understanding and feeling. And maybe that is also when a person gives a gift. A person gives a gift of pearls. Why does he give pearls? Because it's an expression of something that is totally irrational. What is the point of it? In other words, the person doesn't need it at all. And what he's expressing through that is exactly that, a connection that goes beyond understanding and feeling. It's an essential connection that is expressed through something that goes beyond your own understanding. So that is what is expressed through the pearl aspect of Chassidus, that Chassidus can bring us to a stage of connection to Hashem that is beyond our feelings, represented by the warmth, beyond our understanding, represented by the light. It is just a total commitment and connection to Hashem that goes beyond anything that we can internalize, and that is expressed by the water that envelops us and into which we submerge and submit. So a person could say, what do I need it for? I'm fine without that. I'm good. I'm good as long as I live a life that expresses what I feel, as long as I live a life that respects what I understand. That's good. That's great. What do I need more than that for? What do I need pearls for? I don't need them. So today I had a conversation with somebody, and I asked him if he knows the difference between working hard and working too hard, or working a lot and working too much. Like, where's that threshold? Anyway, we came to the conclusion that working too much is when you work for something that is totally pointless and useless. That's working too much. Because as long as you work hard and you produce results, so you're working hard, you're working a lot, but not too much, or maybe you can't know it's too much. When do you know it's too much? When it's totally worthless and useless. So one might say, working for pearls is worthless and useless. What do I need it for? I don't need it. So why should I exert myself even for that? We're not only talking physically, even spiritually. He says, I'm fine, I'm good, I'm a good enough tzaddik, I don't need it. So that is where we have the second aspect of the answer to why Chassidus came to be revealed at this stage in history, and that is as a foretaste and a sample of Mashiach. That since we are close to the stage when we will go to our wedding with the king, the Jewish people compared to the bride will finally wed the groom that is Hashem. So therefore the point here is that our connection to God as the connection between bride and groom is not just an emotional one, it's not just an intellectual one, is an essential one. It's on the very deepest soul level. So even though we might be satisfied without pearls, but since we are Hashem's bride, we need to dress accordingly. In other words, we need to dress according to His standard and expectation, and not only according to what we are good enough with. So that is the point about the pearls, representing the role of Chassidus as a preparation for the coming of Mashiach, because then not only will Mashiach be teaching us the deepest secrets of the Torah, but that is also when our connection to Hashem will be on the deepest level and the deepest way that transcends our emotional, intellectual, even subconscious levels, and will be an essential one. And what is and Chassidus activates and nourishes that essential aspect or the essence of our souls, which allow us to connect to the essence of Hashem, and that is represented by the pearls that come from the depth of the ocean. The ocean, as we said before, is that reality where the creatures perceive their constant dependence on their source of existence, which is the water. And spiritually speaking, that is a stage in history or it's also a level in all the spiritual worlds where whoever finds him or herself in that stage in this world or in that level in the spiritual worlds is very clear about this reality that God is the only true existence and we are just figments of his creation and behave accordingly and understand that that is what we're here for, to express his will and desire, and that we are totally dependent. We exist because he wants us to exist, and there's a purpose that he has for us, and that is what we are interested in finding out and actually fulfilling. So, to make a long story short, just to review what we just spoke about today, the idea of Chassidus is, like the Rebbe brings from his father-in-law and predecessor, and comparing it to someone looking for coals in the depths of the earth, or for pearls. The idea of the coals that produce heat, warmth, and light, which represents the idea of having motivation and enthusiasm for Torah mitzvahs, and also the light understanding and going beyond your own personal motivation and enthusiasm. The way to achieve that is by doing exactly what the Rebbe tells us to do, but you must breathe on your own. And breathing on your own means to learn Chassidus every day, and not just superficially, but actually engage with it every day and nourish yourself from it every day. That is the oxygen that allows you to have the life necessary to be able to access the warmth and light that Chassidus provides. And then there is the pearl aspect, which is related to the aquatic or marine dimension of perception, which is that we perceive Hashem as the only true existence and our total dependence on him. And that is what will happen when Mashiach comes, and Chassidus is a preparation for that, is a training for that, is a foretaste of that. So those are the two reasons why Chassidus was revealed at this time in history, either because we needed that warmth and light to be able to resist the threat of the darkness, the spiritual darkness that the world experiences. That is represented by the coals, and the pearls represent the preparation for Mashiach, whose main event will be our marriage to Hashem. Marriage meaning the connection on the deepest essential level, and the way to achieve that is through Chassidus that activates our essence, which allows us to connect to Hashem on that level. And that is represented by the pearls that come from the water, which represent not just a connection to Hashem that goes through our feeling and understanding, but a commitment that goes beyond our understanding, just like we submerge ourselves in the water, and that is what purifies us. So I conclude by wishing every one of you that are watching this now to have a happy new year in the teaching of Chassidus and in the lifestyle and behavior that are consistent with the study of Chassidus, and that we should be able to really connect, to be able to internalize these teachings, to learn Chassidus in a way that it enhances our understanding, that enhances our feeling, that enhances our commitment and dedication, and we should be able to see the results of such efforts, that we are able not just to withstand the impact of the darkness of the world around us, but actually illuminate it and lighten the world for others, and see the fulfillment of the ultimate goal, which is the coming of Mashiach and our connection to Hashem in its most essential and maximum way. As I mentioned to somebody today, another day passed and Mashiach didn't come. What does that mean? That means that we're a day closer. Every day that passes, that Mashiach didn't come, that means that there's a day less that we need to wait for him to come. Actually, we're not waiting for him to come, he's waiting for us. That's another story, that's another class. So in the meantime, l'chaim, And we should be successful in our endeavors and see the results of our efforts and be reunited with the Rebbe once again. L'chaim.